Hi, everybody. My name is Keith Freeze, and we currently live in a time where people think their ish don't stank. But as Outcast would say, if you lean a little bit closer, you'll see that roses really smell like poo ooh ooh ooh. Now, what that means in relation to this video is that a couple days ago, I did a video where I kind of ended up talking a little bit about the times that I've scouted in the past, and I was leaning pretty heavily on the players that I've scouted that have turned out to be quite good. But I did mention in that video that scouting is not a perfect science and that you're not always going to get it right. And this is my way of coming back down to earth and showing you guys I'm not perfect. I'm not perfect. And that I do think that my shit stink. So let's lean a little bit closer and check out these roses. So what I would say is that I went through a couple articles that I did over the years or a couple of videos I was invited to be on. And I went through and kind of like looked at who I was big on and, consistently big on, not just, if you do one video, it might just be a reach, whatever. You're making content, I get that. But I tried to look at people that I was consistently big on, and this is the list that I came up with. I picked out 3 players from 3 different drafts so we can have a little bit more to talk about. But we will start with 2018 with Vitaly Kravtsov. Now, I was very big on Vitaly Kravtsov to the point where I have a Vitaly Kravtsov jersey. Okay. So, yes, I really was a very big fan of Vitaly Kravtsov. I guess I still am if I have his KHL jersey. But heading into his draft year, especially right before the draft, you had him playing in the KHL, and he was in the playoffs, and he had just this really standout playoff performance. And he really kind of turned it on at the end. And I think I kind of got blinded a little bit because the year prior for 2017, Cale Makar really wasn't talked about as a top 5 guy for much of that draft year. I mean, revisionist history will tell you otherwise, but the truth is that he was on draft boards, but he wasn't seen as a top 5 guy. But within like the last month before the draft happened, he really kind of came into that discussion. And with Kravtsov having the performance that he did in the playoffs right before his draft, especially playing in the KHL, it wasn't like he had a standout playoff performance playing in, a Pro 3 league. It was the KHL. He had a standout performance. And so I thought that might have been kind of the same thing. Like, here's this really late bloomer that people need to keep an eye on. And I think, to a certain extent, I think that was true. But at the same time, you got to live up to that going forward, right? So I really thought that he was a diamond in the rough, and for his offensive skill set, I thought that he could really be just a game changer. And it really didn't turn out that way. I mean, you can look at this from a couple different ways. I mean, the Rangers drafted Capo Kakko, and they've drafted Alexis Lafreniere, and they've drafted Vitaly Kravtsov, and one could argue that Kakko, 2nd overall pick, Lafreniere, 1st overall pick, should be these outstanding, marquee guys for the Rangers, and Lafreniere is kind of becoming that, and Kakko, probably not. And Kravtsov was taken, I think, 9th overall, and so he was, a top 10 pick, and you throw in the Elias Andersons of the world, and you kind of wonder, is it the Rangers or is it the players? the Kings, I will say, they take a lot longer to let their prospects develop. I think it was Vegas now team president, but then GM George McPhee, who said something one time where it was like, I'd rather overcook a prospect than undercook them. Whatever. I mean, but the point being that he'd rather take his time letting them kind of develop. You'd rather have, a more steady everyday NHLer if it means taking an extra year. So maybe that's the approach that the Rangers take with the players that they draft. But at the same time, looking at who they drafted and seeing some of them not even contributing for the team, it kind of makes you wonder, is it the players that they're picking, or is it the organization not developing them right, or whatever? So the reason why I bring that up is because Kravtsov has since been traded to the Canucks, but he's still playing in the KHL. I don't know if it's that they've had this kind of like mutual agreement that they don't want him to be playing, or what. I don't know what. But my whole thing is that if you could get a guy like Kravtsov to be on your third line who has got offensive skill, and I've said it on this channel, but I was a big fan of Kachev when he was with the Kings. So I remember, I forget what international tournament it was, but there was a tournament where Klim Kostin and Vitaly Kravtsov played on the same line. And I'll never forget it, but like Kravtsov scored a goal and Klim Kostin came in and gave him they all hug each other after a goal. But he kind of like came in like a house on fire and like hugged him a little too hard and like almost kind of like knocked Kravtsov to the ground. But I'm bringing that story up to say, if you could have a Klim Kostin type power forward at center with maybe Kravtsov at left wing and Kachev at right wing, like that's a pretty solid, fun Russian line that you could have as your third line. That maybe at this point, knowing that all three of those guys maybe aren't going to move the needle so much to being top six guys, that could still be a really viable, offensively gifted third forward line. So that, and by the way, I mean, I'm definitely reaching by saying, like an all Russian line, like I'll skip ahead real quick here and just say that too. Like when I mentioned Vasily Podkolzin in some of my stuff, I was saying like he has an Alex Ovechkin style power play shot, which what I mean by that is that he stands in one position just outside the face-off circle and he can like really one-time it. But even I'll say, because it's a ridiculous thing, like, because I've noticed it with other draft pundits and like these draft analysts and whatever, where anytime there's like a successful Russian player, they're always like, he's the next Alex Ovechkin. Why? Because they're both Russian? Or if he's not the next Ovechkin, he's the next Kucherov, or he's, whatever. It's like, okay, like, is he like, or is he more comparable to like, that Swedish guy? Like I guess my point is just like, they're just so quick to being like, oh, you're Russian, he's Russian, you're both Russian, whippy, like, I don't know. It's a bit odd. And so I will say that even for me to bring up Podkolzin like Ovechkin is odd. But then again, this is me saying that, my ish do stink. So again, you got to go back and you got to look at your opinions and you got to laugh at them sometimes, because sometimes they are ridiculous. But to wrap it up about Kravtsov, he is currently in the KHL, and I will say this. I have projections for all the people here on the screen, but I will say that, I don't think that his time in the NHL is totally up. You never know. I mean, the right team could come calling. They could use him in a specific way. I don't think that his time in the NHL has come and gone. I actually do think that there could be something worked out with the right team or right situation. So I'm not totally ruling it out, but at this point, his NHL future is like, it's probably not looking too good, but I'm not going to rule it out. So next, I've got Ryan Merkley. And I will say that Ryan Merkley, at the time of his draft, had and maybe still does, but he has all the talent in the world. I mean, a true offensive defenseman. He was just lights out. He was doing things that were just like breathtaking, highlight reel stuff. And I think part of it is you look at that and you're making the immediate projection of thinking, okay, so if that was to play out in the NHL, man, we've got a superstar in our hands, right? But then you have to kind of have that like moment where you go, you know what, he's doing this in juniors where he's probably the best player on his team and getting away with doing certain things that he's not going to be able to do in the NHL. And with his talent, it was so easy to not remember the NHL projection side of it. So I was very big on Ryan Merkley and kind of being like, okay, this guy is going to be this puck mover. He's going to, really add kind of a fourth forward. Sometimes the way I project like a third off or an offensive defenseman is kind of saying like a starting five is more of a 3.5 and a 1.5, meaning like you're getting 1.5 defensemen and 3.5 forwards. So Ryan Merkley, I really thought was that 3.5 forwards kind of thing. He really was offensively gifted, where I thought that if you had him out there with a really stout defensive defenseman, that it could have really been this nice balance. Of course, there were all these things that came out about Ryan Merkley's off the ice attitude and whatever, and I don't know anything about that because I didn't talk to him. I don't know him. I'm not going to make that projection, but those were the things that came out about him, was just that he was difficult to work with and like whatever. And so, or if not difficult to work with, that he just, I don't know. People said he had an attitude problem. I don't know what, but basically my point in bringing that up is that I was looking at the on the ice stuff. I wasn't looking at the behind the scenes character stuff. For me, I am a big character person, just with people in general, and so not being able to factor that part in because I didn't see his interviews or whatever. I was solely going off of what I could see on the ice, and what I saw on the ice I liked a lot, but I maybe missed the junior to pro level, jump that is necessary. I kind of maybe overreached on that. Merkley is currently in the KHL, probably doesn't play in the NHL, and he's going to probably make a career for himself overseas. So the next person I've got on this list is Dominic Bach. Now, this one for me, I can admit, is definitely me trying to push a narrative rather than anything else. I really want to see German hockey be successful. Like I would absolutely love it if Germany became this big international, player within, hockey. It would be so great for the sport. And when I saw that Dominic Bach was eligible for that draft, I definitely was pushing hard that he should be drafted in the first round. And again, it was mostly because he's German born. It's me being selfish. I can admit that. It's me being selfish and saying, here's this thing that is completely out of his control. He could have been born anywhere, but he was born in Germany. So I'm like, yeah, let's go. So I definitely overreached with that. I don't think that Dominic Bach is a bad player, by the way. I don't. I just can definitely say that him being German and wanting to have Germany be bigger in the hockey world was me really pushing that. And, I wasn't too far off. In 2019, Maurice Cedar went 6th overall, and the following year is when Germany really had their glow up, where they had Stützle and Reichel and JJ Peterka, and even like 2022 you had Julian Lutz. So I'm saying that I wasn't too far off in seeing that Germany was coming along, but I maybe projected a little too hard for Dominic Bach. He's currently playing in the German Pro DEL, and I don't think that he's going to probably make it in the NHL. Has never played a game in the NHL despite being a first-round pick. I'm going to say that was a big oversight and overreach for me. 2019, Vasily Podkolzin. Now, I kind of briefly talked about Podkolzin and the whole like comparing Russians to Russians thing. But I will just say that in terms of like him with Russia, when he played for Team Russia in the Hlinka Gretzky heading into his draft year, he was outstanding. I think he had 2 hat tricks, and it was just this crazy good performance from him. And I think I leaned on that more than I did anything else. Like, it was kind of one of those things where I watched his Hlinka Gretzky and I went, okay, that's who he is. I don't need to watch anything else. And I think during his draft year, if I remember right, I think he bounced between like 3 different leagues in Russia. I think he went between the KHL, the MHL, and I think like whatever. I mean, he bounced around. So my point is that I think there was sort of a certain level where it was like he wasn't ready for the KHL, but he was better than the MHL, and they had to find a middle ground. And I just kind of looked at that and went like, you know what? He's 18 years old. I don't expect him to be overly successful in the KHL. But seeing that he's better than the MHL is a good sign. And I was really, again, leaning on his Hlinka Gretzky performance, just kind of whatever. And I kept pushing that I thought that he was going to be a top 5 pick, and more specifically a top 3 pick. There's a video that I did with a couple guys that I was invited to do, and I had the 3rd overall pick, and I took Vasily Podkolzin, and people in the comment section were like, that's a reach. And, I can admit it was a reach. I, again, was very much leaning on past performances and not necessarily factoring in what had come after that. And also, too, at the time, my reasoning was why I picked him 3rd overall was that the Chicago Blackhawks had that pick. In real life, they ended up taking Kirby Dach, who I really wanted the Kings to get Kirby Dach. But anyway, the Blackhawks took Kirby Dach, and the reason why I said that they should take Podkolzin was because I did think that he needed time to grow his game. And the one thing I will say about Russian players and whatever, like, there's this sort of weird like stigma with drafting Russians because people be like, oh, I can't get him over here yet. I have to wait 2 or 3 years. It's like, you have to wait 2 or 3 years to let him play in the 2nd best league in the world? Like, huh? Like, why is that a bad thing? Like he's playing pro hockey in the 2nd best league in the world, a league that's better than the American Hockey League. And oh, by the way, you don't have to be paying him or signing him to a contract to be playing over there. Like, there's a lot of benefits to letting them grow back in the KHL, So my whole thing was like, all these guys need time to grow. They're 18 years old. They need time to play. Let Podkolzin, if I'm saying this as the Blackhawks, is like, if you drafted him and you thought like we can get the most out of him at a later date, like, let him play in the KHL for 2 or 3 years. It's not going to financially bankrupt you at all. You don't have to sign him to like let him do that. Okay. And then you can bring him over at a later date. He's a little older. He gets it. He's played pro hockey, 2nd best pro league in the world. I mean, I don't understand this kind of hang up that some people have about like being shied away from drafting a Russian-born player because they can't get him over right away. It's like, you're going to probably stick him in the AHL anyway. So just let him play over in the KHL. It's a great league. It's, whatever. So that was partly why I thought Podkolzin should have been Chicago's pick. But he is currently playing in the NHL for the Edmonton Oilers, originally drafted by the Canucks. And I would say that right now he's a contributor. Is he living up to his 10th overall draft stock? Like, probably not. But he's still playing in the NHL and he is contributing. And you never know. Maybe in time he gets a bigger role and things can change. The next person I've got here is Simon Holmstrom. And I'm going to kind of like preface some of this, okay? So there are people on this list like Podkolzin or Holmstrom or Lundell that are playing in the NHL, okay? And so you might be sitting there thinking like, well, why is this a read or why is this a miss? A lot of the reasons why these are misses is because I was projecting them a lot higher than they were really drafted or like kind of turned out to be. And for Simon Holmstrom, I was telling people at the time, again, in like articles or videos, whatever, where I was saying that I thought Simon Holmstrom should have gone 4th overall. I was going through and like at the time I had like this kind of projection thing where I would use certain leagues to actually equate to certain things. So as an example, if you earned so many points in like a junior league, whether it was the CHL or USHL, that point is 1 point. But if you were playing in like a pro league in Europe, maybe like the SHL or something like that, then, you're obviously going to have less points because you're playing less minutes, you're playing against tougher competition, whatever. And so, I would make an adjustment with those points. And so for the point adjustment that I was looking at with Holmstrom was I was seeing this guy that was like kind of, like there's that scene in Moneyball where they're showing you all these guys on this list that get overlooked and whatever. Like that was kind of my Simon Holmstrom moment. Just kind of like looking down the list and going, who's this guy? And like running a number and going, oh, wow, there's something here. So 4th overall, definitely a reach. But he is playing in the NHL, and he's a solid contributor right now for the New York Islanders. So I would say that it turned out that it is true that he ended up being an NHL contributing, solid, everyday player. But again, the projection of 4th overall, when you compare that draft and say that, you had Jack Hughes, Moritz Seider, Dylan Cousins, Matthew Boldy, Cole Caulfield. There's 5 guys right there that I would say would go before Simon Holmstrom in a redraft. So 4th overall, definitely a reach. But the player itself is not a miss. And that's not me flexing, by the way. That's not being like, well, I still got it right. I'm just telling you that my hang up, and I'm going to circle back to this point in a moment, but that basically when I'm making these projections, sometimes they're reaches, and that is ultimately a miss. So I've got Maxim Kajkovic, and he is, at the time that I was kind of studying the different players and scouting them, the one thing I saw that I really was super impressed with was that he was a true journeyman, for being so young too. I mean, he was 18 when he got drafted, and up until the night that he got drafted, he had played in the Czech, he played in Sweden, Quebec, and then he played in international tournaments for Slovakia. So he really was a true journeyman. He had been around, and when you're trying to project certain players, and you'll hear scouts or whoever talk about maturity and all these other things, but it's like, what is more mature than bouncing between 3 different countries and 1 province? I mean, technically in another country. So 4 countries, that's pretty damn impressive to be bouncing around that much when you were that young. And it shows that you care about your career and you care about the thing that you want to pursue in life. So that was a very appealing part of it. The player itself, I thought he was kind of a more offensively driven player than defensive. And I thought that he was good with his offense, but Again, it was more the journeyman part of it that I was really kind of sold on. It was like, okay, we need some, we need some maturity from our draft picks. What's more mature than this guy that's been bouncing around the world trying to become a pro hockey player? And so I think that was really the thing I more leaned on than anything else. But Koshkovic is currently playing in the Czech Pro League, and his chances of making the NHL are not looking too good. So 2020, Anton Lundell. Now, again, like, to circle back what I was just kind of ending when I was talking about Simon Holmstrom, the thing is you might look at this and you might think this is me actually making a silent flex, okay? Here's the problem with what I'm getting at with how these are actually misses, like real misses, and how they could actually cost me my job if I was a scout, okay? When I was sitting there saying Podkolzin should go 3rd overall, when I'm sitting there saying Simon Holmstrom should go 4th overall, I'm saying these things because I'm making a projection, right? But let's say that again, this is over the span of 3 years. So let's say the first year, imagine I'm working as a scout for a pro team. Let's say I'm a scout for the LA Kings, okay? And they come to me and they go, Keith, who would you take if we had the 3rd overall pick? And I go, Vasily Podkolzin. And they go, really? And I go, yeah, he had a great Hlinka Gretzky, and he's not an everyday KHLer, but you give him a little bit of time, he'll be great. And they go, okay, I can kind of see that, but like it might be a little bit of a reach, but I can kind of see it, right? And then the next year comes around, and they go, Keith, we've got the 4th overall pick. Who do you think we're gonna take? And I'd say Simon Holmstrom, and they go, who? What about this Dylan Cousins kid or Cole Caulfield? What, you don't like them? Oh, I like them too, but I think Simon Holmstrom's going to be better. And like what? And they'd be like, oh, okay. I mean, everybody's entitled to their opinion, but okay. And my point is that in a real life scenario, if these things were to play out, by the time we get to 2020 and they go, Keith, we've got the 2nd overall pick, which they actually did have the 2nd overall pick, but they go, Keith, we have the 2nd overall pick. Who are you going to take? And I'd say Anton Lundell. And they'd be like, okay, so you missed on Podkolzin, you missed on Holmstrom, and those were a 3rd and 4th overall pick. We have the 2nd overall pick, and you really want me to take Anton Lundell over Quentin Byfield, over Tim Stützle, like, you're fired, and that's the point. So this is why I'm saying it's misses, because out of all 3 of them, Anton Lundell, I would argue, is the best of Podkolzin, Holmstrom, and Lundell. Okay, but I kept saying of Anton Lundell that he should be the 2nd overall pick after Alexis Lafreniere. Now, I was adamant about that. Like, I kept saying it over and over again. I'm like, Anton Lundell. And I was far more convinced of it than I was with Podkolzin and Holmstrom. So again, going back to the scenario, if I was a scout for a team, if I'm having to make these projections over the years, and when I finally get to this point of 2020, where I kind of like already flubbed my other picks in the past, if I was sitting there going like, no, you got to believe me, like Anton Lundell is going to be solid. And they go, you know what? I don't believe a damn word you say. And you go like, but I'm telling you, like, this is the man. And they'd be like, Podkolzin was the man. Holmstrom was the man. And they didn't turn out to be that. So why should I believe you now? That's where it can be a miss, when you hitch your wagon to things that maybe aren't there. And that time comes where you actually want to sell a real opinion, people aren't going to listen. It's like the girl that cried wolf, right? Every time she was like, wolf, wolf, wolf. Then, like, by the time a wolf showed up, people are like, I'm tired of hearing this. You're wrong, And so this is my boy who cried Anton Lundell, like, so what I'm saying is that it's a miss for all the other times that I made a high projection. Now, should Anton Lundell have gone 2nd overall? Like, probably not. Okay, Quentin Byfield has turned out to be really solid. Even if you were to say Stützle 1, Byfield 2, Lafreniere 3, that still means Lindell's not going 2. Okay, so anyway, but I will say of Anton Lundell, just to kind of like show you what I was seeing, I could see that he was undersized relative to Anze Kopitar, but in terms of playing that true centerman style, just like that stick to your position, north south, up down, two-way, plant in front of the net, set screens, battle in the face-off circle style centerman. That's exactly who Anton Lundell was, and that's who Anton Lundell is becoming. And right now I think he's like almost a point per game with the Florida Panthers this season. So he has turned out to be a solid player in the NHL, currently playing in the NHL. But again, it's a miss because I kept making these projections prior that make this opinion seem watered down. Even though it's like, this is the guy, this is the one I really mean. And they go, I can't fully lean on you. So again, this is me admitting that my ish do stink, like this is the whole point of this video, is recognizing the times that you messed up and then trying to show that like, okay, I have enough sense to look back on this and be like, no, I was wrong. Not sit there and be like, oh, well, you make your choices. And it's like, no, you can say I was wrong, And by the way, admitting that you're wrong, I would think is a far more attractive and accountable quality than just kind of sitting there and being like, we get some right, we get some wrong. It's just like, no, you can be like, okay, some of these were reaches. And the last player on this list is most definitely a reach, and I will get to that in a moment, but you'll see. So anyway, the point is Anton Lundell, solid everyday NHL player. This is not me making a flex saying like, oh, I had him second overall and look how great he's turned out. What I mean is like, it's actually a miss on my part because for my own livelihood as a scout, I wouldn't have a job. Like that's the reality. Okay. So there's that. We'll go to the next player. It's Noel Gunler. At the time, I really thought that he was the second best Swede available in that draft after Lucas Raymond. I had Lucas Raymond, Noel Gunler, and then Alexander Holtz. The reason why I thought that was because when I looked at Raymond and I looked at Holtz, if I go back, and this is kind of the fun part about it, because again, like, I was kind of saying about Kravtsov where he had this like really standout performance toward the end of his draft year, where he's like leading into the draft, he had this standout performance. I remember Lucas Raymond had a down year his whole season heading into the draft, to the point where he started off as a top 3 guy and it dipped bad because people were like, maybe he's showing who he really is. And I didn't think that for a second. And I was actually like, no, Lucas Raymond is legit. Like, everybody's going to have a bad year. Even I'll say of the Kings this past year, it's like everybody that hated on PL Dubois. Like, do I think it was the player that they should have traded for? No, I really don't. I was big on Mark Scheifele, and I really wish that we could have got him instead of Dubois. Okay. But I will say that it's like, okay, Dubois had a bad year. Some guys have bad years. Like, that's just part of the game. Some guys aren't going to whatever, right? But it's like, if Dubois stayed with the team, he might be having a good year. You never know. I mean, just because he's now on the Capitals and he's got not like half a point per game projection right now, people are going to be like, well, he's not that good. You don't know. He could have been lights out with the Kings this season. You never know. You honestly never know. Like, there are factors that have to be played into this that we can't even account for, okay? So Lucas Raymond, in his draft year, I still thought was the best Swede available. But when I looked at his skill set, Gunler's and Holtz's skills, they all had a high offensive punch, but I thought that Gunler was one of those guys that could have added some sandpaper along with it. And, I thought it was going to be one of those things where he's maybe like teetering between the second and third forward lines as his, top potential, but that you could have put him in the top 6, like on that second forward line, and he could have given you offense and some physicality, and it wouldn't have been an out of place thing. Sometimes with guys like that, you maybe have that more in your bottom six, but I'm saying I actually really thought that Gunler could have been a top six guy with those kind of playing qualities. So I can admit that this was a reach. He's currently in the AHL, so it's not like he's too far away. He could get a call up, or a team could, say, hey, I'll trade whatever to, bring this guy to my team. But I will say that as it currently stands, his chances of making the NHL aren't looking that great, but it's not ruled out. Okay. But again, currently in the AHL, Noel Gunler. And I can admit too that with Raymond turned out to be who he is. Holtz is now playing for Vegas, and he looks like he was a good player to be traded for. And with both of those guys playing in the NHL, Gunler not playing in the NHL, I can admit that that was also a false projection on my part. Okay, now let's get to the final player in this list, and this is probably my biggest miss, and that'd be Jaromir Pitlick. And I was big on Pitlick because Pitlick was posting YouTube videos from when he was a little kid where he was doing all these different skill things, and those videos were incredible to watch just a little kid do the things that he was doing. And again, going back and having some kind of whatever, an ability to kind of look back and be like, maybe I was wrong, is a lot of those videos were just him just doing one, not even one-on-one drills, just doing one drills, just him skating around and doing skill things. So it wasn't like it was against competition. It wasn't all these other things. But you could see that he had this high level of skill just for being a kid. And you're kind of thinking okay, if he can take that skill from when he's a kid and then learn all these other facets of playing, like 5-on-5 and, maybe some penalty kill time and whatever, you might be able to get him to have a more well-rounded game. And if he still has that base of high offensive output, that's kind of the icing on the cake, right? So my projections for him were crazy, absolutely crazy. At one point I said he was in the top 10. At one point I had him at 13th overall. Another point I had him at 20th overall. And then my final projection was 17th overall. And he didn't go in the first round. So, and at the time he was in the CHL import draft, and he went in the second round of that draft, which should have just been a telltale sign for me. And I just completely glossed over it. And this is why I'm saying this is probably the biggest miss. Now, I'm not taking anything away from Pitlick, the player. He's a far better player than I am. Whatever. But I'm just saying that I had a lot of, I reached way big on Pitlick. And part of that was, again, when I go back to that YouTube sensation type thing, another player who was kind of similar to doing that kind of thing was Oliver Wahlstrom. Wahlstrom had that clip that was, really popular on YouTube from when he was a kid. And then he went and played for the National Team Development Program. And that kind of elevated him. It was kind of oh, he has this amazing clip. And it's wow, that's amazing. And then he went and played for NTDP, and you go wow, that's amazing too. And Oliver Wahlstrom has turned out to be an everyday NHL guy, maybe not a top 6 guy or anything like that, but just a contributor. But he's in the NHL. And so I think that was partly it for me too. It's Pitlick is kind of like that. He's kind of got that thing, because when he played in the OHL, he had good numbers. It wasn't this was, whatever, but I think that was partly it too. It was it was comparable, and I was kind of reaching oh, this is kind of what Wahlstrom did, so maybe that's what Pitlick can do. And it didn't turn out that way. Anyway, but again, with his draft stock, that was my biggest reach and my biggest miss. I kept to at one point to have said that he was in the top 10. Again, when you go back and read that article, you just go oh God, Keith, Like, what are you thinking, man? Like, and so again, this is the primary example of saying sometimes we all have our misses, right? But to wrap that up, Pitlick is currently playing in the Czech Pro League, and his chances of making the NHL are probably not that great. But as you can see, we all have our misses in life. None of us are perfect, right? People that don't own up to their mistakes, like that's a miss too. I want to maybe like gear the end of this video just outside of hockey too, but it's like own up to your mistakes, own up to your misses. We're not all perfect. We're going to not get it right. That's part of life is like sometimes you get things right and sometimes you get things wrong. And if you kind of keep going through life thinking like, oh, I'm constantly doing everything right. And like what, or if you just think that you've never like, if your misses in life or the times that you really mess up in life and you just blow them off because you don't want to face them, like, man, that's a miss, So yeah, I'm doing this video to say like, I am definitely not perfect. Okay. I'm far from perfect. Okay. But there are times where I get things right and there's times where I get things wrong, like really wrong. And so, again, I'd rather point out the times that I didn't get it right and at least be like, look, I'm self-aware enough to show I'm not egotistical and naive and whatever, But that was kind of the bigger point of this video, was just to show like, no, I don't get everything right. Okay? Yes, my ish do stink. Okay? Either way, thank you for checking out this video. My name is Keith Freeze. Have a great day, everybody, and go Kings go.